Welcome to the Temple of the Silver Stars public webinar. This is the 7th class out of 12 in our series on paths, letters, and correspondences. My name is Matthew. I'm an academic track instructor in the Temple of the Silver Star. So this is our 7th class. That means as of the end of last week, we're halfway through. So we're now starting again on the second half of the class. Glad to see a lot of you returning for the long haul. Just a reminder, if my face is getting in the way of the slides, you can dock the little video window screen there. You just hover your cursor over it. You can dock it kind of like above where the chat is. And as we go along, feel free to jump in with questions and comments in the chat. And then at the end, I'll hang around for a few extra minutes if anybody has any further questions. But all right, so let's just jump right into it. So last week we talked about, we've gone through, after we had an introductory class, then we talked about the mother letters, single letters, or mother letters, double letters, then single letters. And now we've just been going 3 letters per class in alphabetical order. So last week we finished up with the 6th letter. Vowel was our last letter. So we're starting off with our 7th letter, Zain. All right, so you usually see it spelled Z-A-I-N. You also see Z-A-Y-I-N, which is nice because it is Zain and not Zain. We're not big sticklers on pronunciation, but please don't say Zain. Zain. All right, so it's a single letter. So we know as a single letter, it's going to be attributed to one of the signs of the zodiac, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So for the hieroglyphic origin, we've been talking about these as we've been going along. It's possibly that hieroglyph there, which means manacle or fetter. The Proto-Sinaitic, no. Oh, I don't get the reference, which is probably a good thing. So and then our Phoenician symbol there, it sort of looks like a capital I, generally means weapon. But you can see how if you just take the vertical bar there and just kind of rotate it, it would look very much like a capital Z, which is where the Greek letter zeta comes from, and then that eventually turns into the English letter Z, through Latin. So our English equivalent is Z, and the sound it makes is basically the same as the English Z, so this is a pretty straightforward one. As the 7th letter of the alphabet, it has the numerical value of 7. Spelled in full, it's spelled Zayin Yod Nun. And so if we add that together, that would be 67. Or if we use the final value of Nun, we get 717. Sometimes I think there's a little bit of confusion with the final values, and using the final values is probably less common than not using the final values. Sometimes I think people get a little bit confused about that. You could almost think of using the final values as like a variation on the main way of doing gematria, which is not using the final values. So you should know both, but occasionally people get confused about, why aren't we using the final value? And we're starting the 7th week. Yep, exactly. And this is number 7. So our value spelled in full here is 67. And this is the same value as Binah, right, which is the 3rd Sephiroth. So that's a very interesting connection. And we'll be talking about Binah a few times throughout our course of today. All right, and so its meaning, now the hieroglyphic meaning is a little bit complicated. The standard meaning that we use in our tradition, and the one that you should know primarily, is sword, though it's probably weapon more generally. It can also mean arms, not the things attached to your shoulders, but in the sense of like weapons, like to take up arms, all of that. This isn't like the normal Hebrew word for sword, and it is used to mean weapons and arms even into modern Hebrew, though it is somewhat dated. And I was learning that in modern Hebrew it's actually become a kind of a vulgar slang term for penis. And so occasionally there have been like Israeli politicians giving giving talks and have used this kind of slightly kind of archaic word meaning arms or weapons that's caused a good bit of giggling. But for our main purpose here is sword. All right, so again, as always, we'll be going through the 32 paths of wisdom here. So this is our 17th path. So again, we'll do Westcott's translation, since that's the more traditional one and the one that's more relevant, that you'll see more in the Phalemic and Golden Dawn tradition, and also give you a more modern scholarly translation from Kaplan, Arya Kaplan. All right, so Westcott gives the 17th path is the disposing intelligence, which provides faith to the righteous, and they are clothed with the Holy Spirit by it. And it is called the foundation of excellence in the state of higher things. And then Kaplan gives 17, consciousness of the senses. This is prepared for the faithful saints so that they should be able to clothe themselves in the spirit of holiness. In the arrangement of the supernal entities, it is called the foundation of beauty. And that phrase, foundation of beauty, is interesting in Hebrew, right? Foundation is Yesod, which we know is the 9th Sephirah. And then beauty, of course, is the name of the 6th Sephirah, Tifereth. So foundation of beauty is Yesod ha-Tifereth. Obviously, Westcott's translation there has a slightly Christian sort of bent there. I mean, he uses the term Holy Spirit there, which is obviously a Christian term. And so, Kaplan's translation there is obviously the more accurate to the Jewish tradition, is just spirit of holiness, right? Yeah, I don't have a ton to say about that, so we'll just move on. Okay, so here we see the path of Zain on the Tree of Life, the 17th path. And you can see there connecting Binah, which we just talked about, that it has the same value when spelled in full as Binah. And it connects Binah to Tifereth. So another one of our paths, as we've been looking at lately, of paths that start in the supernals and then descend down, or alternatively lead from below the abyss to above the abyss. So it's another one of those paths here. And it's interesting to sort of look at, that's something, an exercise you could do would be to look at all those 5 paths and think about, what they all have in common, since they all have, they share this in common of leading from above the abyss to below the abyss. And so you could look at those 5 or lay out the 5 tarot trumps related to that. That can be a nice way of exploring the Tree of Life, is taking paths that are grouped in a certain way that share something in common, and then looking at the symbols or the tarot trumps associated with them, and trying to see the way that their positional meaning is also reflected in other symbols or correspondences. All right, so here we got our Yetziratic attributions for the letter here. So Zain is attributed to the constellation of Gemini, which is the twins. We saw its meaning as sword before, and there's going to be a lot of that symbolism of duality, right? Especially in our tradition, the sword. Well, sometimes swords are used as the weapon of Mars, and then it has a more martial and warlike significance, strength and power, or as the flaming sword, the descent of power in the creative act. But often, especially when they're associated with air, swords have the import of division and of duality, or of analysis, right, of dividing something. And that's very much in play here, and is extremely appropriate to Gemini. Again, Gemini is literally the twins. The glyph of Gemini is basically a stylized version of the Roman numeral for 2. So a lot of duality symbolism here. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about the way that the kind of mathematical permutation qualities associated with the zodiac signs give us our basic significances of Gemini in astrology. So it's a diurnal sign or a yang sign, again, often called an active sign or masculine sign, but I prefer the yang terminology. It's a mutable sign, right, which means it's going to be, as yang, it's going to be active and more of a projective sort of force rather than a receptive one. It's mutable, which means, as you would think, that it's changeable and it is involved in transformation. It's an air sign, so again we have speed and activity, and all the air signs really involve duality, and we can think of duality as one of the significances of air, especially in astrological contexts. Air signs are often seen to be sort of talkative or verbal or social, and all of those things have a duality about them because it's a relationship between 2 people or communication between 2 or more people, of course. So there's always this multiplicity, and the air, of course, is, we think of the wind, air moves quickly. So we get all of these associations here. And Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So this is the day house of Mercury. We'll get to Virgo, of course, but that'll be the night house of Mercury. So this is a more active, a more expressive form of Mercury, rather than Virgo, which is a more receptive or passive form of Mercury, or passive expression of Mercury. And let's see, I'll read you some of the keywords that I've got in my notes here for Gemini. I've got, let's see, fast, changeable, scattered, diffusive, splitting, multiple, contradictory, mental, verbal, clever, technical, flexible, adaptive, open-minded, conversing, social, curious, and sometimes that dual nature could be something like hypocritical. That could be a kind of shadow expression of the Gemini nature, for Gemini people. But we can really see how a lot of this comes out of the basic symbolism, of speed, right? We have both air and Mercury. Mercury, of course, is very much associated with speed. The fact that it's changeable, that's Mercury, that's air, that's mutable. So this is probably the most changeable and most variable of the signs because it gets it through air, through Mercury, and through being a mutable sign. The idea of splitting and multiplicity or contradiction. Again, this is all coming out of this stuff about twins, about air. And Mercury in general has the significance of analysis and of duality. Especially in traditional astrology, Mercury is often seen as, duality can be thought of as like the gift of Mercury, though Mercury itself often resists dualities, being neither benefic nor malefic, neither a day planet nor a night planet, neither male nor female. So there's an interesting relationship with dualities, and we'll continue to see that as we go on with more of the significances here. All right, so for our magical weapon here, we have tripod, which is an interesting one. The basic reference here is actually to the Delphic oracle, who sat upon a tripod, and the letters Zain and Gemini have this association with prophecies and with oracles, and part of that is connected with speech, which Gemini is very much connected with speech. Gemini people are known to be talkers, right? And again, that's coming out of Mercury and out of air. And so this idea of speech and prophetic speech is associated with Gemini. And we'll see that a few times as we go on. So in the tarot, this is Atu 6, the lovers. Interestingly, in the Marseille deck, it's the lover, singular. It's a single man, usually pictured as standing between two women. But that gets changed into the lovers, which is an interesting thing to reflect on. And then we can also see the 8, 9, and 10 of swords related to Gemini. Those would be like attributed to the 3 decans of Gemini, the divisions of the sign into 10-degree sections. And each would be ruled by a separate planet. But that's not super relevant for what we're doing here. All right, so for its Perfumer Incense, 777 gives wormwood, and Crowley notes that this is likely due to the mental stimulation and mental activation that wormwood produces. He's especially thinking of wormwood's presence in absinthe, which, if you've ever drank absinthe, with wormwood in it, that the mental effect of it is somewhat different than standard alcohols. So that's what it's doing here. So for its magical powers, we have bilocation, which is the power of being in more than one place at once. This is a power we often see in the Greek and Roman traditions. Pythagoras was said to have this power of bilocation, and other Greco-Egyptian sort of sages and magicians were often said to have this power. A number of Christian saints were said to have this power as well. I've read a few sort of accounts of the way that the different traditions have thought of it. Sometimes it sounds a bit like astral projection, like your body could be in one place and your mind or spirit could be in another place. But at other times, it really does seem to be the power of literally being in 2 places at once. But again, of course, all this stuff about duality and movement is very appropriate to Gemini. And again, we also have the magical power of prophecy. All right, so here are our color scales here. I'm not going to have a ton to say about this. The orange of the King scale, Crowley relates that to the idea of the solar twins. Interesting idea. And as we'll see, there's a kind of connection to Apollo here through Apollo, the Oracle of Delphi and Apollo's relationship to prophecy. So there is maybe something of a solar significance coming in here, but it's obviously it's an air sign ruled by Mercury. It's not incredibly solar in its nature. In the Queen scale, we have a pale mauve. In the Prince scale, we have new yellow leather. This is just sort of a guess. I'm doing my best to approximate the colors. I had often heard, and had never really looked into it, that all of these colors were based on like Winsor-Newton colors. That may be true, but I couldn't really find a lot of the colors. A few of them I was able to locate, but some I couldn't. So I don't know if that means that they're just not made anymore, or that they have different names. I'm not sure what's going on there. But with some of these colors, I've had to do my best to guess what they might be. And then and again, the Prince scale colors, as we talked about, is more or less a blending of the King and Queen scale colors, and you can see how that is sort of true here. The pale mauve would turn the orange a little bit lighter and make it a little bit browner as well, but it's not exactly a mixture. And in our Princess scale, we have reddish gray inclined to mauve. All right, so for animals here, we've got the magpie, and that's a magpie that you can see on the left there. Crowley says that the magpie is appropriate to Gemini, both for its piebald coloring and also for its power of speech. And I didn't realize this. I actually just learned this morning. Magpies actually can imitate human speech. Yeah. They're in the corvid family, so they're related to crows and ravens, but they do have this ability to mimic human speech. And then Crowley says that things like parrots can also be attributed here for the same quality of being able to mimic speech. Crowley also notes the zebra as an animal for Gemini, and it's simply because it's striped. For our legendary order of being, we have ominous appearances and banshees. And I think the connection with both of these here is through the idea of prophecy. Banshees were said to appear kind of heralding like the death of a family member. And again, this idea of ominous appearances, like, ominous is obviously from the word omen. And so we have this sort of idea of something predicting the future, even if it's a kind of sinister prediction of the future. And then for plants, Crowley gives all hybrids. Oh, and that was true of animals as well. Hybrids, again, the idea of this sort of duality of two things being brought together or something being separated. And so you have the idea of hybrids. With animals, Crowley says that this is especially appropriate because Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury often has kind of asexual or sterile significance, and many animal hybrids are sterile. So that works nicely. And for plants, you get all hybrids and also orchids. I was a little unclear. Crowley talks about orchids having a duplex nature, but I'm not really sure what he means there. I was thinking maybe he thought that the orchid flowers might resemble both like male and female genitalia, though I'm not sure about that one. So for stones, we have the Iceland spar, and you can see that on the right. We also have alexandrite and tourmaline. Now, I wasn't able to really track this down for alexandrite, but tourmaline and Iceland spar definitely do this. They polarize light. And so again, this idea of polarization is very appropriate to Gemini. And Iceland spar, I was reading, may be the stone that Norse sailors used a crystal to polarize light to be able to determine the location of the sun when it was cloudy, for navigation purposes. And so the Iceland spar may be the crystal that these Norse sailors were using in order to do that, but no one knows for sure what it was. But they have this, light polarization power, which is very useful for navigation when this, the sun is obscured by clouds. And again, tourmaline is also quite famous for its light polarization, and apparently alexandrite as well. All right, so for Greek and Roman deities, we've got Castor and Pollux. And so Castor and Pollux are associated with the constellation Gemini very directly. So in the upper left there, you can see a star map of the constellation Gemini, and you can see how they're the twins, two human figures there. And the brightest stars located at their heads are Castor and Pollux. So Castor is the brightest star in Gemini. That's Alpha Gemini. And then Pollux is the second brightest star just below it. And you can see in the Northern Hemisphere, Gemini is very visible at night right now. And Castor and Pollux are quite bright. So unless if you live in the middle of LA or New York, it might be hard to see. But Castor and Pollux are very visible, like here in Sacramento. Let's see. So we've got, and then the lower image there too. These are some Roman statuettes of Castor and Pollux. They're often depicted. Oh, I'll say a little bit about their mythology. Actually, I'll go on to the next image. Okay, so this image is a copy of a lost original by Leonardo, which you can really tell. I mean, if you know Leonardo's paintings at all, this thing sort of immediately screams Leonardo, but maybe not quite as good as Leonardo usually is. I mean, you know, the landscape, the way her face is drawn. Yeah, so it's a copy of a lost original. So anyways, this is Leda. And the swan, Leda was impregnated by Zeus in the form of a swan, and then she gave birth to 4 children all at once, kind of male twins and female twins. So the male twins are Castor and Pollux, and then the female twins are Helen and Clytemnestra. And so the idea, now there's a lot of variations in this mythology, but the most common one, and I think the one that is most relevant for our symbolism here, is the idea that both of the male and female pair of twins, one of each is the son of Zeus, and the other is the son of, I'm totally blanking on Leda's husband's name now. Anyways, like, so one pair of each is, or you know, one of each pair is mortal, and the other is immortal. They have different fathers despite being twins, which is actually possible. I didn't realize that, but this can actually happen in humans. You can have fraternal twins with different, it's extremely rare, but it is attested. So anyways, of Castor and Pollux, one of them, and so now Helen and Clytemnestra, of course, are also twins and have some of the same stuff, but we're most concerned with Castor and Pollux here. So one is mortal, and then one is immortal as the son of Zeus. And so, yeah, they let's see, what's some other stuff about their mythology. They're often associated with horses. They're often depicted with horses. That's a big part of their iconography. They were known as great horsemen. They're also sailors, so they sail with Jason on the Argo, and were often seen as the protectors of sailors. If you're familiar with the electrical, weather phenomenon called St. Elmo's fire, that was, St. Elmo, right, is a Christian saint who's a patron of sailors, but Castor and Pollux served a similar role, and that phenomenon, which occurs during storms, the bright glow around the top mass of ships in thunderstorms, was thought to be the presence of Castor and Pollux protecting the sailors. After they die, actually, interesting about Castor and Pollux, which twin is the mortal and which one is the immortal varies sometimes between the stories. But there's not, other than that, there's not a lot of difference between them. They usually do things together. But eventually the mortal twin is killed. And then the immortal twin, because he's allowed to go to Olympus, because of his divine heritage, but the mortal twin has to go to Hades, but he doesn't want to be separated from them, and so they end up sharing the immortality. And so in some versions of the stories, the two of them are always together, and they alternate, back and forth day by day, being in Hades and then being in Olympus, and then sometimes it's throughout the year. So they spend 6 months in Hades and then 6 months in Olympus, by basically splitting the immortality. So again, all these ideas about duality, you see all those sort of references here. Okay, now we have our magical hierarchy of Gemini. Again, we're following the same basic pattern that we have with the other zodiacal signs. So we know for our Atsaluthic name, again, I've been giving 2 different Atsaluthic names here. So we have the first, the 12 banners of the name, the 12 permutations of Yod He Vav He. So here we've got Yod Vav He He. And then also as an alternate divine name, I've given you the divine name of Mercury, since Mercury is the ruler of Gemini. It could also be rule over the powers of Gemini, and that's Elohim Zabaoth. Then for our Briatic name, we have the archangelic name, and that's the Archangel Ambriel, the Archangel of Gemini. And then for Yetzirah, again, there's lots of different Yetziratic names, different angels, appropriate to the triplicities and decans, and lots of variations. But the 2 most important I've given here is the angel ruling the house, which is Giel, I'm saying that right. And then the lesser assistant angel in the sign is Sariel. And then I've also included an Asiatic name. Now, like I've been saying, this one isn't always used in doing invocations. If you're invoking a spirit or you're going to scry, there's no need to call all the way down to a Saya. But if you wanted to invoke that power in the material plane, you could use the heaven of Asaya, which is Teomim, which is the Hebrew name for the constellation Gemini. All right, and then we come to our tarot trump. So this is Atu 6, the Lovers. And our esoteric title, this is another one of the double esoteric titles, is The Children of the Voice, the Oracle of the Mighty Gods. So again, we've already talked about this idea of voice and of oracle, and that's definitely present here. This is a complex card. You can really see the color scales. Let me flip back to the color scales and just take a look at those colors for a second. Yeah, and then there again, you can see a lot of those colors present here. You can see the gray and the mauve in the robes of the figure in the back. Now that figure in the back is basically the hermit, who we'll talk about, I guess, next week. And so he appears here. Interestingly, this card has more, I think, relationship to other cards than probably most of the other cards, if that makes sense, right? So we've got the figure here from, we've got the hermit here from the hermit card. And then we've also got a lot of relationship here between the symbols and the art card, which we'll see attributed to Samek, which is really interesting. We'll talk about this again more when we come to the art card, but they really do form a pair. And that works out very nicely zodiacally too. Gemini and the art card, attributed to Samek, is attributed to Sagittarius, and Gemini and Sagittarius are directly opposite each other on the zodiac wheel. So they form this really nice pair. And we can really see them as, Crowley talks about this too, that in order to understand them, you really need to look at them together. And so again, we'll come back to this when we talk about art. But we could think of analysis as division and as duality, and then Samek and art as the reunification. So we have analysis and synthesis, the two phases of the alchemical work, Solvay et coagula, right? And so here we see the mystical marriage. And then when we look at the art card, we'll see the marriage sort of fulfilled in the two elements of the duality, the two polarities, not just being married, but of actually having become one. We've got a lot of symbolism related to that here. We've got the red and white queen, the alchemical queen, king and queen. We attribute to we can talk about those as solar and lunar, silver and gold. The red work and the white work, all of that is extremely relevant here. So we see the king on the left, and you can see that he has serpents on his robe, and we'll talk about serpents more as we go along today. And on the queen's robe, you can see that she has bees, and we talked about bees as, there's a number of ways that bees could be attributed, but one of them is to Venus. Now he's carrying a spear or lance, which is the divine weapon, associated with the divine masculine, and she's carrying the Grail, which is, associated with the divine feminine. If you're familiar with Crowley's Gnostic Mass, you can see a lot of the same symbolism there in this card. The lance and the Grail, and the union of the lance and the Grail plays a big part in the Gnostic Mass, and is very present here. And if you're familiar, we've talked about Parsifal, Wagner's opera in the past, and so the way that the lance and Grail are portrayed in that opera are also very relevant here, especially at the very end of the opera. And then we see the two children here. They're sort of countercharged, so they correspond with the king and queen, but have kind of swapped sides. We also see the red lion and the white eagle, who again have very alchemical symbols. The red lion related to the masculine, and the white eagle related to the feminine. And so again, related to the silver and gold, and to the red work and white work, and their union. We also see the serpent-wrapped Orphic egg there, and it's winged. We can see this as something like the product of the marriage. The Orphic egg is a really deep and complex symbol that's really excellent to meditate on. So I don't want to say too much about it here, but we can talk about it at least one way as the union of the male and the female, the fertilization of the egg, the life potential. All of that sort of symbolism is here for sure. Now, above the hermit, we see a winged figure there. This is like Cupid or the Roman Eros. And you can see on his quiver there, we've got the word thelema. And so the idea of the arrow. And again, here's another connection too with the art card. Sagittarius, of course, is the archer. And we see an archer here in this card as well. And so the idea of thelema or will as direction, and as something that comes from above. So we could read some of this symbolism of of divine inspiration and of the will, coming from the higher. That's all going on here. So a lot of really complex stuff. We've also got Lilith and Eve in the background there, which if you're interested in those symbols, you look at some of the, I forget which Aether that is, but in the Vision and the Voice, Crowley has a vision related to this card specifically, and you see a bunch of biblical symbolism there. So you can check that out. Interestingly, that vision actually gives it what's supposed to be like the correct design of the tarot trump, but that's really, he's incorporated a bit of it here, but not entirely. So that's an interesting thing to look at. We also see in the background, we see kind of arches made of swords there, right? And so that's, again, sword for, for Zain. Okay, yeah, let's move on. This is an interesting class that these three letters happen to be the three that we're talking about today. We'll see some of these same symbols reoccurring in our next two letters. All right, so for our next letter here, we're going to talk about Cheth. All right, Cheth is another single letter. Oh, I wanted to say about Zain. Let me go back. Oh, there you go, see it there. Don't confuse Zain with Vav. They are quite similar looking, but the easy way to remember is Zain is written with two separate strokes, and Vav is a single stroke, although they are quite similar. So that's an easy one to confuse, so just be careful there. And with Zain too, you can really see the shape of the letter as a kind of sword. The lower, longer part, would be like the blade of the sword, and then the kind of yod sort of shape at the top, that would be like the guard, of the sword, part of the hilt. All right, so for Cheth here, now this is another one that's easy to confuse. The thing you're probably most likely the letter you're most likely to confuse it with would be He. And the thing with He is that the difference from He, the main difference is the left leg there on He doesn't connect to the top bar. There's a gap there. And if you remember that He means window, it's at least one way of looking at the letter He is that gap between the leg and the left leg and the top bar, that gap is the window, kind of the window into the letter or something like that. And so Cheth doesn't have that. All right, so Cheth is another single letter. You might also confuse it with Tav, though Tav is really sort of easy to remember because it has that big sort of swollen looking foot on the left-hand side. But we will get to that at the end. All right, so another single letter. So again, we know that it's going to correspond with one of the signs of the zodiac. The hieroglyphic origin for this one is really complex, and it probably comes from multiple hieroglyphs, so it's not really worth getting into. The Phoenician letter there, you can see, the Phoenician letters vary a lot. The images I've been showing have been kind of like idealized, versions of them or something like that. But in practice, the Phoenician letters can be drawn. There's a lot of variance in the way they're drawn. And this letter meant something like courtyard or wall. Its sound is what's called a voiceless uvular fricative. So fricative means that the air is being forced through like a kind of narrowed passageway. Uvular tells you where it is. It's kind of at the back of the, like sort of by the base of the tongue, where your uvula is, that little thing that hangs down into your throat. So that's where the sound is being produced. And it's voiceless, meaning that the vocal cords are not being engaged. And so I do it's kind of an odd sound for English speakers. So yeah, Cheth, right? It's that sound in the kind of towards the back of your throat. All right, but our English equivalent is CH, but again, it's not a ch sound. You just be careful with that. It's not Cheth, right? It's Cheth. Has a value of 8 as the 8th letter of the alphabet. Spelled in full, it's spelled Cheth Yod Tav, and that's value is 418. As some of you are probably already aware, 418 is an extremely important number, especially for Crowley. The most important being the word abrahadabra, which we'll talk about more in just a minute. So it's one of the most important words of the New Aeon dispensation. It's symbolic of the great work. And so that adds a lot of depth and significance to this letter here by virtue of the value of 418. All right, so its primary meaning is fence. That's the main one that you should know. Again, this isn't like the Hebrew word for fence, but it's the the meaning of the hieroglyph through its origin from Phoenician. It's also sometimes given as wall or has that significance. And the word Cheth can also mean beast, derived from Chia, Cheth Yod, which means living or life. It's also the part of the soul attributed to Chokmah. And then that, the tav at the end changes it into the form of beast, meaning like living thing, right? This is beast not in the sense of monster, but beast, like the beasts of the field or whatever, in sort of biblical language, that sort of beast. Though, again, with Crowley and the great beast and all that, there's certainly some interesting connections that we could make, especially with 418 being abrahadabra, one of the word of the aeon, all that significance. All right, so let's look at our path of wisdom. So this is the 18th path. And Westcott gives, the 18th path is called the intelligence or house of influence, by the greatness of whose abundance the influx of good things upon created beings is increased. And from its midst the arcana and hidden senses are drawn forth, which dwell in its shade and which cling to it, from the cause of all causes. Kaplan gives 18, consciousness of the house of influx. By probing with it, a secret mystery and an illusion are transmitted to those who dwell in its shadow and bind themselves to probing its substance from the cause of causes. So this is a really interesting one, and I think when we start looking at the tarot card, the Chariot, I think there's some interesting, we can really bring some of this symbolism and this language to that card. The idea of like the influx of good things. I think that all becomes pretty relevant. There's some other the language of like dwelling in the shadow is sort of interesting. That's from I think the 91st Psalm, talks about dwelling in the shadow of Shaddai, and Shaddai is a divine name associated with Yesod. So we can bring in some of that kind of connection as well. That's quite interesting. Let's just move on here. Okay, so here we've got Cheth on the Tree of Life. And so it connects, this is the 18th path, and it connects Binah to Gevurah. So again, this is going to be the last of our paths that, connect the supernals to that which is below the abyss. And this is especially relevant here. And it's especially relevant that we're connecting Binah to Gevurah. Binah is the sphere of the Great Mother. It's associated with the goddess Babylon, who we'll be talking about in both of the next letters here. And so this idea of something descending, a force that descends from the abyss to below the abyss, and specifically, descending from the Great Mother or the sphere of the Great Mother is extremely relevant here. As we'll see when we get into the tarot card. All right, so let's look at our Yetziratic attribution here. So Cheth is attributed to Cancer in the zodiac, right? It's just our next sign. Again, other than that, the haze switch we talked about, we're just sort of going in order along the zodiac signs. So this is Cancer, the crab. It's what I'm calling a yin or nocturnal sign. Also called, feminine or passive, but I prefer yin. It's a cardinal sign, so we're talking about the initiation or the beginning of something with the cardinal signs. And I pasted the wrong glyph in there. That should be the water glyph. I cut and pasted the wrong one there. So pretend that little horizontal bar isn't there. That should be water. I'll try to remember to fix that before I create the final slide document here. So it's a water sign. It's also the domicile or house of the moon. So the moon rules Cheth, and this is the only sign that is ruled by the moon. So this is really the house of the moon. And as we talked about, I guess a couple weeks ago, the moon only has Cancer isn't usually referred to as like the night house of the moon, but we can sort of think of it that way. The moon has no day house. Only the one house, and it's a nocturnal sign. Jupiter is also exalted here in Cancer, which again doesn't, at least in my understanding, doesn't extremely influence the meaning of Cancer, but it's interesting to think about why Jupiter might do well here and why Jupiter might express himself in a strong benefic form. All right, so let's see. For Cancer, I'll read some of my keywords that I've got in my notes here. I've got nurturing, maternal, protective, cultivating, cautious, emotional, fluid, safety, comfort, feeling, changing, moody, no straight lines, sort of moving in a curving fashion or kind of a sideways fashion like crabs walk, right? The need to be cared for and also caring for others. So you can see a lot of these are lunar significations, things about the maternal and about care and about needs and instincts. These are all lunar things. The watery and receptive nature is appropriate to water. With the idea of the cardinal here and the idea of the initiating or beginning, we can think of mythological images like the primordial waters or primal waters, and also of birth too, right? I mean, birth is of course associated with the moon, it's associated with water, and it's also very much the beginning of something or the initiation of something. So a lot of that symbolism comes together very nicely here. All right, and so for our magical weapon, Crowley gives furnace, which seems really odd, right? We're lunar and watery, but furnace is hot. But in the notes, Crowley tells us that the significance here is of the sun in Cancer. And the sun's ingress into Cancer is, in tropical astrology, is the sort of definition of is defined by the summer solstice. So this represents the sun's move into Cancer is the summer solstice and the height of the sun's power. And so that idea of the furnace there makes sense if we think about the season associated with the sun being in this sign. Now he also gives the cup or the grail, which is much more, I think, appropriate to the actual symbolism associated with Cancer, and also connected to the tarot card as well. And we'll talk about them, those two symbols as we go along. The cup, of course, is the elemental weapon of water. And the grail is essentially the same thing as the cup, but in a higher sense, right? Like you can think of the grail as like the divine cup rather than just like the elemental weapon of the cup, but they're essentially the same thing. All right, and so for our tarot cards, we've got 2, 7, the Chariot. And now we can also, the 2, 3, and 4 of Cups also correspond with the 3 decans of Cancer. All right, so for our Perfumer Incense, this is kind of sort of a strange one. The main one listed here is, I'm actually not sure how to pronounce this, but Onika, or Onika. Yeah, again, I don't know how that's actually supposed to be said. And actually, no one is quite sure what this is. It's listed as one of the ingredients in the temple incense, like the Temple of Solomon incense, which had 4 components. At some point in the later tradition, those 4 components get attributed to the 4 elements. And so that's where some of this elemental stuff comes from. And so Onika would be the one attributed to water. And so that's why we see it here. We'll also see it on the Path of Mem. Actually, I didn't mention this when we looked at air and galbanum. Galbanum is also a component in this incense, and that's the component attributed to air. Though again, no one really knows what this actually is. It's possibly a piece of the shell of sea snails. There are some plants that have been associated or have been suggested as possible meanings of the word, but no one's sure. And so as a practical thing, I think getting the pieces of the snails is probably quite difficult, and you may not want to do it. And I've heard it actually smells really bad if you burn it. So you could use myrrh or camphor. Myrrh is a water incense, and camphor is a lunar incense. So those are both nice alternatives for actual practical work. All right, and then for our magical power, we have the power of casting enchantments, which I think is here because of the associated with the moon. The moon is often associated with enchantment, or so bewitchment or beguilement is a lunar thing. So here we have the power of casting enchantments. Again, with these magical powers, sometimes the magical powers are more like practical correspondences, and sometimes they're more like mythical or symbolic. So I think this is more of a mythical or symbolic one rather than a power that magicians would be like actually cultivating. All right, so here are color scales for Cheth. For Absolute, we've got amber, Crowley talks about amber, and actually we'll see the stone amber in a moment as well. Crowley talks about amber having like an electrical significance, right? If you rub, like a piece of amber with silk, you can build up an electrical charge. And the idea of that electrical charge, Crowley gives kind of a sexual significance to that. The idea of like two things that are charged and then have a charge between them. And we'll see some of that symbolism with Cancer, and the idea of conception or of fertility. We've got some of that symbolism here. And then the Queen scale, we've got maroon. In the Prince scale, we've got some sort of a combination of the amber and maroon to a bright, rich russet. And then the Princess scale, we've got a dark greenish brown. So that was my best guess for a dark greenish brown. All right, for animals, we've got the crab. And this one's quite obvious, right? Cancer is the crab. The association of Cancer with the crab is an interesting one. Crabs they have these hard exteriors, but soft interiors. And that is a bit like Cancer people are sometimes, said to be. They're soft and sensitive and receptive, but often have built up like a harder, like outer shell. There's also images of because the crabs, can also be, they have these pincers on them. So there's also ideas of like protection or being protective, which, Cancer people are often said to do to protect, people or, animals, things like that, who are vulnerable. It's often a Cancerian quality. So that fits well with the crab. I was going to say something else, but I just forgot what it was. Anyways, we've also got turtle. Turtle, of course, is similar to a crab. It's a water creature with a hard shell, soft interior. The turtle also appears in the tarot. Let's see, in the Princess, or is it the Prince of Cups or the Princess of Cups? I think you can see a turtle there. We've also got the Sphinx. Now, Sphinx is here because of the tarot card. We'll see the Sphinx in the Chariot card, and then also all beasts of transport. That again is the associations coming through the tarot card. For stones, we have amber. As again, there's this electrical significance. Amber is, of course, we call it like petrified or crystallized resin, tree resin, tree sap, which we all know from Jurassic Park, right? And then for our plants here, we've got lotus. Oh, that's what I was going to say about the crab. With the crab and lunar symbolism and the connection to the cup can be thought of in a similar sort of way, right? It's a hard thing that contains something soft and formless, right? Like water or wine or blood, it contains a liquid. And so you've got like a hard exterior with a liquid interior. And so I think we see some of that same symbolism with the crab. Now the moon, the crescent, especially the crescent moon, could be thought of as look like a kind of cup or like a kind of container. And the lotus takes on some of this same significance. Of course, it grows in water, and it has the associations with the cup, by its shape. Deities, both in Eastern and Western traditions, are often seen like seated upon a lotus. So it has the idea of like a container. That makes it very appropriate. It's often associated with the feminine, which makes it appropriate to the symbolism here too. For our legendary order of beings, we have vampires, which I was thinking about this one. The two things I could come up with for why vampires would be here would be one, because they're not like specifically lunar, but they're very much not solar, right? Vampires are creatures of the night. So you have a kind of night significance here with the house of the moon. And, I was speculating maybe also with sometimes the cup or the grail is thought to be associated we're filled with blood. Whether this is like through the Christian tradition, with the idea of the Eucharist, or coming through Babylon, which we'll be talking about. And of course, vampires drink blood, but it's not a great attribution, but there you go. Okay, so then let's see. Yeah, instead of doing the deity attributions here weren't super important, I didn't think, just weren't that significant. So instead, I thought I'd give you some of this phonemic significance that I've been kind of hinting at, and will also be important for the next card or the next letter as well when we look at Teff. So this is from the phonemic holy book Liber Cheth. This is just an excerpt. This is just the first 6 verses. I think there's 22 verses, I think, in total. So this is just the beginning of it. So this is, so Liber Cheth, and it's sort of, or the walls of Abiegnis, Walum Abiegni there. Abiegnis is the holy mountain of the Rosicrucian tradition, which is something you can look up. I don't want to spend too much time getting into it here. But there's that significance. And then it's subfigura, or under the figure of 156, which is the value of the name Babylon. So again, this idea of Cheth, and as we'll talk about in a moment, the significance of the Charioteer, the bearer of the Grail, that stuff is all being brought up by this title here. So I'll just read the first 6 verses here. This is the secret of the Holy Grail, that is the sacred vessel of Our Lady, the Scarlet Woman, Babylon, the mother of abominations, the bride of chaos, that rideth upon our Lord the Beast. Thou shalt drain out thy blood that is thy life into the golden cup of her fornication. Thou shalt mingle thy life with the universal life. Thou shalt keep not back one drop. Then shall thy brain be dumb, and thy heart beat no more, and all thy life shall go from thee. And thou shalt be cast out upon the midden, and the birds of the air shall feast upon thy flesh, and thy bones shall whiten in the sun. Then shall the winds gather themselves together, and bear thee up as it were a little heap of dust in a sheet that hath 4 corners. And they shall give it unto the guardians of the abyss. And because there is no life therein, the guardians of the abyss shall bid the angels of the winds pass by. And the angels shall lay thy dust in the city of the pyramids, and the name thereof shall be no more. So, there's obviously a lot of things that could be said here. The main sort of spiritual, or initiatory process that's being talked about here is the crossing of the abyss and the ending up in Binah. And there's all this idea of the annihilation or the loss of the self is all part of this symbolism. Also, the symbolism of giving up of the life force, giving up of the blood into the cup of Babylon. Here. Now, there's been a lot of artistic representations of Babylon, but here's one by Kat Luneau, and some of you may be familiar with her. I'm sure some of you are already familiar with her work. This is a painting of hers called Babylon. And then you can see Babylon seated amidst the 7-pointed star or heptagram of Babylon. She's bearing the Grail, and also some other appropriate symbolism there. If you don't know Kat's work, obviously that catluneau.com isn't really part of the painting. It was just I grabbed it from her website. If you don't know her work, check out her website. You can buy her prints and things like that. She's a great artist. I hope she doesn't mind me using her painting here. Let's see, what was I going to say? Oh, right. So I assume a lot of you are familiar with the origin of Babylon as from the Book of Revelations. The whore of Babylon, who was drunken upon the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, right? And she's an extremely negative symbol in the Apocalypse, in the Book of Revelation, but in the Crowley's dispensation, or the Thelemic dispensation, the visions of Crowley's visions. She, as well as the beast that she rides upon, are transformed into divine and sacred and holy symbols. And we'll talk about that a little more as we go along today. The blood of the saints, right? And so even that image of being drunken upon the blood of the saints, instead of it's funny. It's not that it stops being blasphemous, but it becomes a blasphemy that is something beyond dualistic notions of the sacred and the profane. So in a way, she doesn't lose the blasphemous connotations. It's just that blasphemy itself is elevated into something beyond the sacred or beyond the holy. There's a kind of antinomian sort of quality to it as well. And of course, we can also talk about. There's a lot of things that we can talk about, about the idea of a woman experiencing drunkenness and sexual pleasure being elevated from a negative symbol into something sacred is obviously extremely important to the new aeon. Again, I don't want to get too sidetracked here, so let's just move on. But again, we'll come back to Babylon when we look at our third letter here, because this is an interesting thing. I was thinking, it's nice that these two cards, Cheth and Teff, and the Chariot and Lust, sort of happen to be right next to each other in the ordering of the alphabet. But it's really not a coincidence. It's Cancer and Leo, the house of the moon and the house of the sun, which are next to each other and bear a lot of that significance of the solar and lunar, as the masculine and feminine powers. That's very much part of the symbolism of Babylon and the Beast and the union of Babylon and the Beast. All right, so here's our magical hierarchy for Cancer. Again, with zodiac signs, so following the same pattern that we just talked about. So our 12 banners of the name, this is the one of the permutations of the Tetragrammaton. And here we've got He, Vav, He, Yod. For our divine name, as an alternate one, I've also given you the divine name of the moon, Shaddai El-Chai, which is most specifically the divine name of Yesod, but also has a general lunar power and then can also be used for Cancer as well, since it's the domicile of the moon. All right, and then for the Briatic level, our potency is the Archangelic, and this is the Archangel of Cancer, Muriel. And then for Yetzirah, the angel ruling the house is Ka'el. And then the lesser assistant angel is Pakiel. And then our heaven of Messiah, which is, again, just the Hebrew name for the constellation of Cancer, is Sarton. All right, and here we've got our, here we've got our Atu 7, the Chariot. The Teratrum attributed to the letter Cheth. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this card. We see the 4 sphinxes down at the bottom there. There's an interesting sort of progression of the Sphinx symbolism. If you look back at like the Tarot de Marseille, you'll see that the chariot is being drawn by 2 horses. And then, actually, I can't remember if Levi comes up with this or if he gets it through Atea. But anyways, in the early 19th century, the horses get sort of reinterpreted as sphinxes. Usually just shown as a pair of them. But then in Crowley here, they appear as 4 sphinxes. And the 4 animals, the lion, eagle, bull, and which one did I forget? Lion, eagle, bull, and, and the man or human, they're permuted here so that each one of the 4 animals here has one of the parts of one of the animals. And so we can see this is related to the idea of like the 16 sub-elements where you have not just fire, water, air, and earth, but, like fire of fire, water of fire, air of fire, and so on. Also the 16 court cards of the tarot, that same idea of dividing up each one of the elements into the 4 elements again. All right, and so we've got the charioteer here seated in his chariot, and he's people, I think, have sometimes been a little bit confused about what he's holding there. This is the Grail. It's just sort of tipped so that you're like looking into the Grail, but the liquid isn't spilling out. This is another example of the way that like Lady Frida Harris sort of distorts and in a very sort of modern art kind of way, distorts or twists up space. Like if you know, Cubist art and things like that, you'll be familiar with that type of visual motif, and she uses that a lot. So he's holding the Grail, and you're kind of looking straight down into it. So this particular image is very much drawn from one of the visions from the vision of the voice, the vision of the 12th Aether. So I'm just going to read to you a little bit of the text of the 12th Aether. Now, the 12th Aether is significant, well, for a lot of reasons, but one is this is the first time that Crowley is introduced to this god form of Babylon, and the idea of Babylon as a thelemic deity. Of course, he's already been introduced to the idea of the Scarlet Woman, so it's kind of building on images that he's already gotten, but here it's being, connected to Babylon. And then it's not until 2 Aethers later, until he crosses the 10th Aether, that he actually receives the full spelling of the name Babylon. But that's an interesting progression. And then she appears again in the vision of the 2nd Aether as well. So it's an interesting sort of progression when you're reading through the vision of the voice to pay attention to. But this card in particular is most associated with the 12th Aether. So I'll read a little bit from that. So this is right from the beginning. There appears in the stone 2 pillars of flames, and in the midst is a chariot of white fire. This seems to be the chariot of the 7th key of the tarot, but it is drawn by 4 sphinxes, diverse, like the 4 sphinxes upon the door of the vault of the adepts, counterchanged in their component parts. The chariot itself is the lunar crescent, waning. The canopy is supported by 8 pillars of amber. So again, we see the moon and amber, which we've already seen. These pillars are upright, and yet the canopy which they support is the whole vault of night. The charioteer is a man in golden armor, studded with sapphires, but over his shoulders is a white robe, and over that a red robe. Upon his golden helmet he beareth for his crest a crab. His hands are clasped upon a cup, from which radiates a ruddy glow, constantly increasing, so that everything is blotted out by its glory, and the whole air is filled with it. And there was a marvelous perfume in the air, like unto the perfume of raw wheat, but sublimated, as if the quintessence of that perfume alone were burnt. For it hath the richness and voluptuousness and humanity of blood, and the strength and freshness of meal, and the sweetness of honey, and the purity of olive oil, and the holiness of that oil which is made of myrrh and cinnamon and galangal. So there's a reference here to the recipe for cakes of light from chapter 3 of the Book of the Law. The charioteer speaks in a low, solemn voice, awe-inspiring, like a very large and very distant bell. Let him look upon the cup whose blood is mingled therein, for the wine of the cup is the blood of the saints. Glory unto the scarlet woman, Babylon, the mother of abominations, that rideth upon the beast. For she hath spilt their blood in every corner of the earth, and lo, she hath mingled it in the cup of her whoredom. With the breath of her kisses hath she fermented it, and it hath become the wine of the sacrament, the wine of the Sabbath. And in the holy assembly hath she poured it out for her worshippers, and they have become drunken thereon, so that face to face they have beheld my Father. Thus are they made worthy to become partakers of the mystery of this holy vessel, for the blood is the life. So sitteth she from age to age, and the righteous are never weary of her kisses, and by her murders and fornications she seduceth the world. Therein is manifested the glory of my Father, who is truth. And then he notes parenthetically, this wine is such that its virtue radiateth through the cup, and I reel under the intoxication of it, and every thought is destroyed by it. It abideth alone, and its name is compassion. I understand by compassion the sacrament of suffering, partaken of by the true worshippers of the highest. And it is an ecstasy in which there is no trace of pain. Its passivity is like the giving up of the self to the beloved. The voice continues, this is the mystery of Babylon, the mother of abominations, and this is the mystery of her adulteries, for she hath yielded up herself to everything that liveth, and hath become a partaker in its mystery. And because she hath made herself the servant of each, therefore is she become the mistress of all. Not as yet canst thou comprehend her glory. Beautiful art thou, O Babylon, and desirable, for thou hast given thyself to everything that liveth, and thy weakness hath subdued their strength. For in that union thou didst understand. Therefore art thou called understanding, O Babylon, lady of the night. All right, so we should move on, but just a couple of things. Obviously, that emphasis on understanding there, understanding in Hebrew is binah, and so a lot of this is preparing Crowley for his initiation into binah. And Babylon is, although she's quite relevant here for the path of Cheth, is most especially attributed to binah. Just one or two other things about the card. Obviously, that vision there describes a lot of what's being pictured in the card here. A few things about the color scales. If we look back, so here's our colors there. And we'll notice that there's a bunch of colors here, the blue and the red, that aren't, part of the color scale of Cheth. But they are chosen for a specific reason. The blue there is the blue of Binah, and the red is the red of Gevurah. And as we saw, Cheth is the path that connects Binah to Gevurah. So we've got, the colors are still being chosen for their Kabbalistic correspondences, but we're looking outside of just the letter in itself and also looking at the two paths, specifically the two Sephiroth, that path connects. One other little thing to note, I don't know if you've ever noticed this before, but we've got the word, it's supposed to be the word abrahadabra, right? The word that adds to 418, written in the canopy along the top here. But, I assume this is just an error. It actually says abracadabra. Again, abracadabra, of course, is an ancient it's become, I don't know how exactly, but it became the kind of the word in the magical word in the popular imagination. But it really is a genuine ancient magical word. You can find it like, Greco-Roman texts and all that, which clearly respelled abrahadabra in giving it the value of 418 and its other significance that comes out of that. But I think just as an error, she painted the card with abracadabra, but symbolically it should be abrahadabra. Okay, so, and I don't think I mentioned the esoteric title here. The esoteric title is The Child of the Powers of the Waters, the Lord of the Triumph of Light. Again, we've talked about water symbolism a lot here. Lord of the Triumph of Light, that sort of made me think about, the idea that the sun's entrance into Cancer is the summer solstice. And so that could be seen as the triumph of light, the sun reaching its zenith. All right, so let's do our last letter here for the day. This is Teth. All right, another single letter. So again, we know we're going to have a zodiacal attribution. There's its possible Egyptian hieroglyph that it's derived from, which means good. And then here is its Phoenician letter that it's derived from. And you can sort of see how that shape could get simplified over time and become the letter Teth. It also gets simplified and becomes the Greek letter theta, which is a little easier to see. You just drop out one of the crossbars and rotate it a little bit. And that Phoenician letter may mean wheel or good, though I was a little bit confused about. And then I saw other sources that were saying that it's not clear what that Phoenician letter's significance would have been. Anyways, it has the sound T, like the English letter T. And so our English equivalent is T. Don't get it confused with Tav. Usually Tav will be written as like capital T, lowercase h, even though Tav sometimes has the hard T sound as well. But in like transliteration of Hebrew, you'll just have just the T on its own, will generally mean Teth. All right, so as the 9th letter of the alphabet, its value is 9. And its spelling is full is Teth Yod Tav. So spelled almost the same as Cheth, which was Cheth Yod Tav, but Teth is one more. So our value is also going to be one more, and we have 419. I was sort of thinking about, I've seen in some more traditional like Hebrew Kabbalistic texts, the idea if you have something that adds up to like one more than another significant number, that thing will represent something that is like beyond that. So I don't know, I was wondering if we could sort of think of Teth somehow as being like beyond 418, maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but it was an interesting thing to think about. All right, so its meaning the main meaning that we use here is serpent. I was sort of unclear about how that actually gets derived from the Hebrew and from the Phoenician, but that's the meaning that you should know, and that's its main symbolic significance. It may have to do with the shape of the letter. It gained, there was the idea that it represented a serpent came in. I'm not clear on that. Other sources will also say that rather than serpent specifically, it means something like a coiling or a twisting or something coiled or twisted, and that serpent is a derived meaning from that. It can sometimes also, the word Teff is sometimes given as meaning wheel in Hebrew, though it's not the normal Hebrew word for wheel. So yeah, I'm unclear on that one, but serpent is the main symbolic significance that you should be aware of and will be relevant for the rest of our discussion here. One other thing too, I'm not going to get into it here too much, but that the shape of the Phoenician letter, the X inside of the circle, that shape, that symbol is a really important one. It has a lot of different significances. It's associated with Malkuth. It's also associated with Binah. The idea of the cross in the circle is similar to like an X in the circle or a cross in the circle can be a kind of form of the rose cross, the symbol of the male and female. The cross has like a phallic significance, and the circle having like a vaginal significance. And so, the union of the male and the female, the union of the self with the beloved, we can kind of read a lot of that stuff into the shape of the Phoenician letter, which is extremely appropriate for a lot of the significance that we'll see for Teth. All right, so our path of wisdom here, this is the 19th path. Westcott gives, the 19th path is the intelligence of the secret of all the activities of the spiritual beings, and is so called because of the influence diffused by it from the most high and exalted sublime glory. And then Kaplan gives 19, consciousness of the mystery of all spiritual activities. It is called this because of the influx that permeates it from the highest blessing and the supreme glory. Yeah, I don't really have anything specific to say about that, so we'll just move on here. All right, and then we see the place of Teff on the Tree of Life, which is extremely significant. It connects, this is our second reciprocal path. We saw Daleth was our first path, which connected Binah to Hokmah. And then our third reciprocal path, which we haven't talked about yet, will be Pe, which connects Hod to Netzach. All the reciprocal paths connect a watery Sephirah to a fiery Sephirah. So there's always this idea of the union of opposites, or the marriage of opposites. If you also look at the three reciprocal paths, their values add to 93, which is a very interesting thing. And also the highest reciprocal path, Daleth, connecting Binah to Hokmah, is attributed to Venus. And then the lowest reciprocal path, connecting Hod to Netzach, is attributed to Mars, right? And so Mars and Venus, again, this sort of male and female polarity idea. And then Teth is going to show the marriage of those two things. So we have this both kind of vertical and horizontal symmetry here of connecting Gevra to Chesed, the divine masculine and feminine together. And then also this vertical union of Mars and Venus, which is, I think, really cool. Yeah. So let's move on here. We can also see, some of the solar significance might make sense. Tefereth is also, in a lot of ways, the product, or like the child of Gevra and Hesed. And so Teth, as being like the marriage of Gevra and Hesed, is naturally related to Tefereth. And so some of the solar qualities, as we'll see, make a lot of sense here as well. And you can see that in the other paths as well. The path of Pe shares a lot in common with Yesod, even some gematria, which we'll get to when we come to that letter. All right, so for our Yetziratic attribution, we've got Leo, the next constellation, or the next sign moving around the zodiac wheel. Leo is the lion. It's a yang or diurnal sign. It's a fixed sign, and it's attributed to the element of fire. It's also the domicile of the sun. So we'll be seeing a lot of both solar and fiery symbolism here. Let's see, my keywords that I've got here for Leo are center, bright, shining, pride, sometimes arrogance, regal, consistent, loyal, leadership, though also sometimes tyranny, strong, vigorous, illuminating, performing. The sun in Leo can be associated with like performers, actors or musicians. The need to be seen, a concern with authenticity, an organizing intention or a directing intention. That's all associated with Leo. And we can see, how a lot of that stuff falls out of both solar and fiery significances, though you also have the fixed significance here as well. This is fiery, but unlike Aries, which represents a kind of explosion of fiery force that doesn't endure, this is an enduring force, which, very much like the sun. I mean, the sun changes its position in the sky, but the sun doesn't wax or wane. It's always constant. And of course, we know that the sun is the center of our solar system, and that it doesn't even rise or set, but it's only our position that changes relative to it. The idea of a fixed or a constant fire works very nicely for the sun. Again, the directing power is very much, related to the sun, especially in a psychological kind of interpretation of the planets. The sun being the directive power associated with, like with the ego and the identity, or like the spirit even. And so again, like I was saying, now here we have the domicile of the sun, and so it pairs very much with Cancer, which is the domicile of the moon, and we'll see that, in the sun and the moon, the marriage of the sun and the moon, which we actually saw in the Lover's card, the union of the sun and the moon, again has a lot of this significance of the union of opposites, and gives a nice kind of overall theme for the whole class today. All right, so for our magical weapons, the first one Crowley lists in 777 is Discipline Preliminary. So I'm not entirely sure what he means there, and he doesn't explain it. I assume this would be, as I think I talked about a little bit last week, the magical weapons associated with the zodiac signs are often qualities or items related to like the preparation of the space for a magical working. So I assume the idea here is like a discipline, like something that you would do in the days leading up to a big magical working, like fasting or maintaining like, sexual chastity or something like that, or meditation or keeping yourself separated from worldly duties or these types of things. Though it's not really clear to me why this would be associated with Leo, so I'm not sure about that one. But he also gives in the notes, he gives us an alternate, the Phoenix wand, which is one of the wands used from the Golden Dawn tradition. It's a kind of version of the Egyptian was scepter, which has got the head of the Set animal on it. So yeah. Again, we know wands are often associated with fire, with projective and active force. And, the Phoenix, of course, is associated with fire and the renewal by fire. So it makes a lot of sense. So for our tarot card, we've got up to 11, lust or strength. Oh, and I forgot to list the 3 minor arcana. We could also have the, let's see, what would that be? The 5, 6, and 7 of wands. I'll try to remember to add that in before I do the final notes here. But those 3 cards would be associated with the 3 decans of Leo. All right, so for our Perfumer Incense, Crowley lists molybdenum, which is just an alternate name for frankincense. I assume you're all familiar with frankincense. It's one of the more common incenses. And frankincense can be attributed both to the sun and to fire. So it's both fiery and solar and is absolutely perfect as the incense for Leo here. And if you know what frankincense smells like, it's quite appropriate for solar and fiery purposes. Its magical power is the power of training wild beasts, which is a fun power. And I think this is coming from the tarot card association, especially the more traditional association of strength, which Crowley renames as lust. And we'll talk about why he does that. But the strength card shows a woman holding open the mouth of a lion, right? So that idea of training wild beasts. All right, here's our color scales here. King scale, yellow-greenish. Queen scale, a deep purple. Now, those are almost opposite colors. And so for the Prince scale, we have gray. Now, really, if you mix those 2 colors, you get like a brownish sort of color. But gray it stands here for the same sort of idea that because you united opposite colors, they've kind of, you canceled each other out, and you just get gray. And then for the Princess scale, we have a reddish amber. That one makes a lot of sense as the, associated with, red and amber both have a solar significance. So that works a lot. Crowley talks about the yellow-greenish color being like the color of like the first blossoming of plants. So again, they have the idea of blossoming and fertility, of life in the beginning or, initial impulse of life, which makes a lot of sense. All right, for our animal, we've got the lion there, which is, very classically associated with the sun. Obviously, you can see it, literally the lion's mane looks like, the sun radiating light. Also, all cats, Crowley, I think, mentions tigers in particular, but all cats can be associated with the path of Teth. Also, the serpent, because of the meaning of the letter name Teff, is associated here. And then this isn't in 777, but I also listed rooster. Eshelman lists it in 776.5, and you'll see in a lot of other places the idea that the rooster is associated with the sun. And obviously that's because of the idea that roosters, sort of crow at dawn and bring in the dawn. And yeah, we'll see the rooster again in just a minute. Our legendary orders of beings, we have horror, which I'm not sure if there's something more specific being meant there. I'm not quite sure what that is. And also dragons, which make a lot of sense. We have the serpent and fire, right? So dragons. For our plant, we have sunflower, right? Which is extremely obvious. And for stones, we've got the cat's eye. And that, again, is pretty obvious. That band of light, which obviously resembles, the eye of a cat, that's actually like the way that the light reflects. It's not just like a light-colored band in the stone. It's specifically the optical properties of the stone. All right, so we've got a few different Egyptian deities here. We've got Sekhmet, who I've pictured on the left, not on the right. I think I'd rearranged the slide there. But yeah, that's Sekhmet on the left. She's a lion-headed goddess, also solar. She's a warrior goddess. We've also got a few. Pasht is another lion-headed goddess who's again like warlike. I think Pasht was a more local deity. though there's actually a bunch of lion-headed deities, most of them female in the Egyptian tradition. They often have, like some other Egyptian deities, associated with dangerous animals, like the crocodile deities as well. There's a kind of ambivalence where they're at once threatening and dangerous, but can also be called upon for protection from threatening and dangerous situations. And so these lion goddesses have some of that same kind of ambivalence. They're often associated with the desert and with heat, which, again, the Egyptians considered the hot, dry desert as a very evil sort of place, associated with Set, and as that which is sort of inimical to civilization. But again, the deities were also invoked and worked with as protectors, as warriors. Some of the lion goddesses also had like sort of mother and protector symbolism as well. We also have the Mao, who's pictured below there. Mao is a form of the solar god Ra, who took the form of a cat, and specifically in order to slay a Pep, the serpent who threatens the solar bark. And so there you can see Mao, the cat, with his knife slaying the serpent at Pep. We can also attribute Ra-Hoor-Khuit to this path as being both fiery and solar, and Horus as well as having a fiery significance and also being associated with the sun. Then, of course, not quite as much as Ra is associated with the sun, but Ra-Hoor is a I can't think of the right word, but combines both Ra and Horus together, and obviously is extremely important for Thelema. Okay, so the Greek and Roman deities weren't super relevant here. So instead, again, you won't find this in 777, but I think it's an important thing to know. You'll see references in some of Crowley's works and in a lot of other later Thelemic and esoteric works. This is a Gnostic deity who goes by many different names. So we've got Abraxas or Abrasax, also Agathodaimon, Anubis, Yaldabaoth, and many other names as well. On the left, you'll see him attributed, pictured there as a serpent with a lion's head. And of course, we've already seen both the lion and the serpent as related to this path of Teth. And then on the right, we see the same or similar related deity there with serpent legs and the head of a rooster. So having, again, a solar significance. You see the divine name Iao there on the shield that the rooster's carrying. The letter that looks like a W, that's a lowercase omega, but that is Iao. Another name associated with the sun. There's I don't want to get too far off track here. But in the Gnostic tradition, there's some kind of ambivalence about the meaning of this deity. Sometimes the deity is more negative, associated with the demiurge, the creator, the false creator of the world, and all that. But as Agathodaimon literally means like good spirit. So sometimes taken in a more positive way. And I think certainly for the Thelemic tradition, we can understand this as a positive solar force, and the idea of the demiurge. I think we can understand more in like a Platonic sort of way, as not perfect, not the highest divine source itself, but acting in accord with the forms, and is the creator of the material universe, the ruler of the material universe, who does so in conformity with the higher divine principles. Solar, life-giving, all of that type of significance. You can see Crowley uses the idea of the lion serpent, or the serpent and the lion. That gets used in a bunch of different ways in Crowley, sometimes with a sexual significance. Good stuff to be aware of. And I think it's entirely reasonable to think of that deity connected to the path of Teth. All right, so here's our magical hierarchy for Leo. Again, we've got a banner of the name, permutation of Yod He Vav He, here as He Vav Yod He. We've got a divine name. Again, this is an alternate divine name. This is the divine name for the sun, which is Yod He Vav He Eloah V'Da'ath, which means, Yod He Vav He, the tetragrammaton. Eloah is like God. So tetragrammaton, God of knowledge. Now, you can also, if you abbreviate that name, right, the three names there, you would get Yod, Aleph, Vav, and then that could be a Hebrew transliteration of the divine name, Iao. So you can often use Iao as a replacement, or an alternate name for the full Yod He Vav He Eloah V'Da'ath as a solar name. All right, then we've got the archangel of Leo, which is Verkiel. The angel ruling the house is Ovel, and the lesser assistant angel in the sign is Sartiel. And then our heaven of Asaya, again, is just the Hebrew name for the constellation Leo, which is Aria. All right, and I just wanted to remind you of the traditional depiction of the tarot card here. This is strength, or la force in French, and it shows a woman holding open the mouth of a lion. And then in the Crowley Harris deck, this is transformed. And so again, I just wanted to emphasize that you still have the woman in some sense like mastering the lion, but now in a very, very different way, right? So this is Babylon, who we've been talking about, riding upon the beast. I think last week I said that the star card was my favorite. I don't know. This is also a contender as well. I'll probably say that 2 or 3 more times before this class is up, but I really love this card as well. Yeah, a lot of stuff to be said here. She's holding the Grail there in her hand, and the way the Grail is depicted there is extremely interesting. It's almost as if like the rim of the Grail like becomes the horizon, or as if the whole like sky, the upper portion of the card there is like the inside of the Grail or something. That's something I've kind of reflected on in my meditations on the card. But yeah, really interesting the way it's depicted. Now you see the kind of people or these like lights in the ground here. These are the idea of like the saints who have given up their blood into the Grail and have become like like ash in the crossing of the abyss. But they're still sort of present in having given their life force back to the universal eternal life force. All right, and so she's riding on the beast here. The beast here is, of course, depicted in a very leonine sort of way, looking like a lion, less like a 7-headed serpent, though we do have the serpent tail. And with the kind of aureole, the halo around the serpent there, that really reminds me of the depiction of Abrasax, the lion serpent. And obviously that reference is very much here as the lion and the serpent. The beast here has got 7 heads. Now, the beast of Revelation has 7 heads and 10 horns. But an interesting thing has happened here where the horns are no longer connected to the beast. And you can see the 10 horns in the sky above the Grail there, and they're being sort of sent out into the world. And in their coiling and twisting, they're also something like serpents and related to Teth as well. Now, the beast has 7 heads there. And so I wanted to read, this is from the Book of Lies. This is chapter 49. The number 49 can be associated with Babylon. The number 7 is associated with Babylon. There's actually some really complex gematria that you can do with 7 number 7s to get to the number 156, which is the value of the name Babylon. But yeah, I'll just read. This is from chapter 49 from the Book of Lies. 7 are the veils of the dancing girl and the dancing girls in the harem of it. 7 are the names, and 7 are the lamps beside her bed. 7 eunuchs guard her with drawn swords. No man may come nigh unto her. There's sort of a pun there about no man. No man, right, is the name Nemo, meaning no man, is the kind of generic name for the master of the temple, who in crossing the abyss has lost the individuality. So it's not that no one can approach her, but that in order to approach her, there's a kind of giving up of the individual humanity. So no man may come nigh unto her. In her wine cup are 7 streams of the blood of the 7 spirits of God. 7 are the heads of the beast whereon she rideth. The head of an angel, the head of a saint, the head of a poet, the head of an adulterous woman, the head of a man of valor, the head of a satyr, and the head of a lion serpent. 7 letters hath her holiest name, and it is Babylon. This is the seal upon the ring that is the forefinger of it, and is the seal upon the tombs of them whom she hath slain. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of Our Lady, for it is the number of a woman, and her number is 156. So, there's obviously a lot there. One thing I'll say about this idea of the forefinger of it, Crowley always spells this name it, capital I, capital T. And I think there's a lot of things we could conjecture about it. But from some of Crowley's writings, it's pretty clear that the Hebrew letters here should be Yod Teth rather than Yod Tav. So the idea of the Yod, the seed force, and then Teff, having this the kind of sexual significance, the union of opposites, and all of that. It also sums to 19, which is an important number that you can look into. But yeah, it's a special kind of divine name that he uses it, I think, most in the Book of Lies, though it appears in a few other places as well. Yeah, let's see. So we're just about 2:30 here. Just trying to think of anything else I really want to say about this card. Yeah, we can see the color scales pretty clearly here. Flip back. Yeah, you can see the reddish amber, the yellowish color. Again, even the purple, it's a deep purple there. You can see in the background. So again, employing the color scales. It's something I didn't mention this when we looked at the star card, but I really I think Lady Frida Harris made a really good decision in not depicting some of the faces. You can see Babylon's face is sort of turned away and nondescript, and the same thing happens on the star card. Nuit's face is turned away and isn't really filled in. It gives it a really sort of universal or archetypal sense that, that no particular face could be the face of Babylon, and no particular face, right, could be like the face of Nuit. So in not depicting the face, I know I've always appreciated how that makes it this sort of universal and archetypal force rather than becoming too like specific or individual. I'll say something about the renaming of the card from strength to lust. I think that we should understand lust almost as like a variation of the name strength, so that it's not simply lust in the sense of like, just sexual desire, but it's a kind of lust for, or passion, for sexual activity, certainly, but also for life more generally, that there's a hunger or but again, not in a negative sense of being unfulfilled, but of a passionate engagement with things, and as a kind of strength, to experience life and to experience unity. So the strength is certainly important here, and it's not just lust. Passion for the great work. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, right. It's not just lust in some mundane sense of like feeling sexual desire, but it's lust in a very deep and strong sort of way that, again, I think we can think of it as a kind of presentation of what the idea of strength would mean, for Crowley and for a thelemic understanding. I don't know. And hopefully that sequence of looking at sort of Babylon and the Grail in association with Cancer and with the card of the Chariot, and then seeing some of those same symbols reappearing here in Lust and with Teff was helpful. And then even sort of works out nicely where we saw some of that same idea of the mystical marriage, the marriage of the sun and the moon in the lovers, associated with Gemini. So we've had a nice kind of sequence of symbols here. And we'll see all of these symbols return as we move on with the cards and the other letters. So I think that pretty much wraps it up. Once again, there were so many more things that we could have said. I'm not going through all of 777. I'm not saying everything that could be said. And there's a lot of interconnections between the symbols that I don't have time to fully spell out. But hopefully you saw a lot of that stuff as we went along. The way that I noticed it, especially looking at the symbolism of Zain, the way that the symbols are intertwined, this sort of duality and unity of division, of air, swords, but also of oracles and prophecies and solar significance. All this stuff gets interwoven with each other in very deep and complex and I think profound ways. So hopefully it's nice to see some of that as well here. Thanks everybody. So that wraps up our class for today. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to hang out for a few more minutes and talk, or any comments. As always, for more information about our work, you can visit tots.org. We've got our FAQ there. There's my email address if you want to contact me directly about any questions about the class or anything like that, or if you want to be added to our public mailing list. We do have a $5 suggested donation for anyone who's not a member of either the academic or initiatory track. If you are a member, you're already contributing to our work. But if you're not, we have a suggested donation, and you can send that via PayPal to payments@tots.org. Yeah, thanks everybody. Yeah, I've been enjoying doing this. I hope it's been useful for you all, and a nice thing to do in these strange times we're in right now. And yeah, if there's no other questions, I'll see you all next week, where we'll keep going through the letters. Oh, guess